At the turn of the 20th century, or 1918 to be exact, clenched in the grip of a devastating pandemic, the Spanish flu. The disease, which was caused by an influenza virus, wiped out millions, and no doubt, the catastrophe was one of the worst natural disasters in human history. But how did it get to this? And where did the virus come from in the first place? Between the first recorded case of this virus in March 1918 and the last case in March 1920, an estimated 500 million people, or around one-third of the world's population, was infected, and 50 to 100 million people died. This airborne virus affected every continent, including the remote Pacific Islands and the Arctic. It was a global catastrophe and resulted in more deaths than the First, or possibly even the Second World War. And if you compare it to other pandemics, it is believed that the number of people who passed away as a result of the influenza pandemic in a single year, 1918, was greater than the total number of deaths that occurred during the 4 years that the Black Death was prevalent. In contrast to the vast majority of influenza pandemics, which occur during the winter and kill patients who are already at risk or weakened, the 1918 pandemic occurred during the summer and autumn, and primarily claimed the lives of young adults who had previously been in good health. As surprising as it may sound, the death rate among people who were 75 or older was significantly lower than any other group. Some people believe that the robust immune responses of young adults were to blame for the widespread damage to the body, ultimately resulting in more deaths. Late 1917 and the beginning of 1918, when the First World War was in its final months, marked the beginning of this pandemic. Though some repercussions of the conflict, like malnutrition, congestion, overburdened medical camps and hospitals, and inadequate hygiene, might have contributed to the spread of the virus, the exact causes of the outbreak are not completely understood. Instead, the fact that these particular circumstances favored bacterial superinfection is what led researchers to their most recent conclusion, which is that the viral infection itself was not any more dangerous than previous strains of influenza. It was rather the close quarters and massive troop movements that accelerated the spread of the pandemic, which was caused by an infected person's sneezing or coughing. Soldiers were especially susceptible because their immune systems were probably weakened due to factors such as malnutrition, the strain of combat, and chemical attacks. Following the conclusion of the war, soldiers who were returning home by ship and train brought the flu into the cities. From there, it began to spread to the surrounding. As soon as the virus manifested itself, the symptoms came on rapidly. Some victims would acquire pneumonia and start turning blue due to a lack of oxygen within hours after the first signs of weariness, fever, and headache. After that, they would fight for breath until it was too late and they had suffocated to death. Concerning what caused the outbreak, there is no complete consensus among experts. Some people believe that the influenza virus first appeared in the United States in March 1918, when a sick soldier named Albert Kitchell reported to the infirmary at the training facility located at Camp Funston in Fort Riley, Kansas. By midday on the same day, 107 people had been hospitalized with very similar symptoms, and within 5 weeks, 1,127 of the 26,000 men who were staying at the camp had contracted the illness. However, other sources claim that by the end of 1917, there had already been an outbreak of influenza in at least 14 military camps in the United States, and a local physician in Haskell County, Kansas, named Loring Minor, notified the United States Public Health Service about the severity of the disease. Another significant investigation suggests that a large military staging area and medical camp near Étaples, France, was the source. Over 100,000 soldiers were moving through the overcrowded camp and hospital every day, making the environment suitable for the spread of a respiratory virus. The patients at the hospital included thousands of battle wounded, as well as victims of chemical warfare. It was also the location of a live piggery, and poultry was frequently brought in from the surrounding villages. This led to the hypothesis that a significant precursor virus, which was harbored in birds, mutated so that it could migrate to pigs that were kept near the front line, and it was eventually passed on to human beings. And lastly, some people hypothesize that the virus first appeared in East Asia, Brest, France, or Austria as early as 1917. Most recently, in 2014, historian Mark Humphreys put forward the theory that the source of the pandemic could have been the mobilization of 96,000 Chinese laborers to work behind British and French lines on the Western Front. A similar respiratory illness struck northern China in November 1917. Spread of the virus. American troops entered Europe in April 1918. Around this time, men in the French trenches began to experience symptoms of la grippe, including headaches, nausea, and lack of appetite. Despite being extremely contagious, the first recovery was quick. Doctors referred to it as a 3-day fever, but it didn't take long to see that this wasn't your typical illness. Because the sickness was still not fully recognized at this point, and deaths were frequently attributed to pneumonia, the drama of the battle served to conceal the exceptionally high mortality rates. A highly virulent strain first surfaced in Brest, France, Freetown, Sierra Leone, and Boston, Massachusetts in August 1918. Ireland was also affected. However, due to its mutation into a considerably deadlier form, the second wave was significantly more lethal than the first. Soldiers who had the less deadly strain remained in their current location, while the seriously ill were sent to field hospitals on crowded trains. Thus, the pandemic was poised to reach its most fatal phase by September 1918. After the deadly second wave, new cases immediately decreased. Theories for this include the virus swiftly changing again to a less fatal strain, or that doctors were more adept at treating and preventing pneumonia. In any case, the sickness that had caused such devastation vanished nearly as swiftly as it had appeared. In May 1918, the port of Glasgow in Great Britain saw the first cases of the flu. The hardest impacted were young women, particularly those who worked in factories. Within a few weeks, the sickness had moved south and by June had reached London. Although it appeared to be a spent force by August, it resurfaced in October and expanded at a startlingly rapid rate. Anyone could contract it because it was not location, gender, or class specific. Prime Minister David Lloyd George did so but lived. So did Robert Graves, a war poet, though he quickly infected his entire family after arriving home from Limerick. Spanish flu was not mentioned in Parliament until October 1918, even though it was known to be contagious, and there was no plan in place to combat it. The response was decentralized and poorly managed, because there was no National Health Service back then. To stop its spread, local authorities and the media did issue some advice, such as to avoid crowds by taking later trains, to dress in layers, to thoroughly wash drinking glasses, to stop shaking hands, and to stop kissing. The goal was to reduce the chance of contracting an infection through touch. Towns had posters up. Health visitors and school nurses handed out pamphlets. Buildings were cleaned and fumigated, schools were closed, and public areas had to be ventilated frequently. Some theaters even forbade kids and took out all the carpets. The first medical students were brought in to assist because hospitals were overburdened, but there was little they could do because there were no medications for the flu or antibiotics for pneumonia. Furthermore, a lack of gravediggers and undertakers resulted in bodies lying unburied for extended periods, and many funerals were held at night. The flu could not have come at a worse time. A quarter of the British population had been affected by the pandemic by the end of the summer of 1919, and 228,000 people had perished in Britain. This brings us to the end of this video. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing and sharing so we can keep bringing more content like this. Also, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.